Today we have a mix, we have an halfway through between some rant and some compliments about the changes for 11.1 to the specs, going through the balance tuning changes planned for the next season. Of course, we're not still yet in the PTR, so it's not that we can see the changes in full detail in-game, but we can still see from the planned changes from the talents, for example, already. And the points in question at the moment are between Holy Priest and Discipline Priest planned for their changes in the next season, because they are the ones that will receive some of the largest sweeping changes. So talents being changed, being moved around, even buffs or nerfs to certain base abilities, and even some iconic abilities, major abilities like, for example, Rapture or Holy War Salvation being removed in the next patch. Now, the positive changes go the way of Holy Priest. Now, this is the current version of Priest in live. This is the new version in 11.1. The major change regarding their cooldowns is that, as you can see, Salvation is gone. Holy War Salvation is no longer there. Instead, now Apotheosis is practically the only option you have as your other cooldown besides Divine Hymn. First thing to notice is that Apotheosis is now going to be in the middle bracket of talents. It's no longer going to be one of the very expensive talent points you have to spend in the bottom row, because usually you would expect these last talents to be very important and powerful, so having Apotheosis move back to the middle row is quite good. It has been nerfed. Now it reduces the cooldown of your Holy Wars by 200% instead of 300%, but it does have a follow-up choice node talent, one Divinity giving you 10% more healing, as well as free casts of Prayer of Healing or Heal as soon as you enter a casted Apotheosis, or Eternal Sanctity simply extending the duration of Apotheosis the more Holy Wars you are casting. This one in particular gaining more and more value, of course, if you play with Answered Prayers, which can proc Apotheosis for free, and when it procs for free you can still extend its duration with Eternal Sanctity. The major change is that currently, the current version of Holy Priest doesn't really like or enjoy too much using AoE spells. We can take a run-of-the-mill, top logs of a current day, current year Holy Priest, and you can see that most of this healing, even written in Chinese, will actually come from single target heals, rather than the AoE heals of Priest. Meaning Sanctify, meaning Circle of Healing, meaning Prayer of Healing. These are not really part of the rotation of Holy Priest nearly as much anymore. Now this is changing in 11.1. There is much more importance now put back into Prayer of Healing. Circle of Healing is gone. It's RIP. The base healing of Prayer of Healing now has been made quite much larger. You then also have more synergy with things like Lightweaver actually also working with Prayer of Healing now. So the 30% faster cast and 20% stronger healing will actually affect not just the heal, which as we have seen is already used a lot with this talent, but now also the AoE part of your kit with Prayer of Healing. So it can make it a 1.2, 1.3 second cast time ability with a substantially higher healing done with the ability itself. Some of the rows of talents have remained the same, like for example having a chance to not spend your Prayer of Mending charges when they jump around, the Holy Words having a chance to reset the cooldown of Prayer of Mending, as well as the good old Answer Prayers still being the same, with some new things. You have some returning talents, or rather returning tier sets, like for example Lasting Words, the tier set that used to leave behind renews to your Holy Words, Serenity and Sanctify. You also have more support for this with things like Holy Mending, healing more a target if it has Renew on, more base healing or Renew. You even have the option to make Renew 60% stronger and give you CDR of Sanctify, but giving it a 12-second cooldown. Even Prismatic Echoes, which already exists right now in the builds, but no longer just for Mastery, also is going to buff up the healing of your Renew as well, not just your Mastery, as well as some brand new additions, like for example Holy Celerity, reducing the cooldown of your Holy Wars by 15 seconds. So now you have a 45-second cooldown reduction as a base for your Holy Words instead of 60 seconds, which can also be reduced even more by playing with Light of the Naru, buffing up the CDR you get on your Holy Words by an extra 20%. So for example, Prayer of Healing wouldn't be reducing Sanctify by 6 seconds, but by 7.2 seconds. And if you are inside of Apotheosis, that would become a 14.4 seconds cooldown reduction. And because the Holy Word, thanks to Holy Celerity, has a 45-second cooldown, if you cast 3 Prayer of Healings, 14.4 times 3, it's about 43 seconds, plus the time it took to actually cast these 3 prayer of healings, and that's Sanctify back off cooldown. So basically, instead of Apotheosis, you will be able to have a Sanctify, triple prayer of healing, Sanctify, triple prayer of healing kind of style if you played with Celerity and with Light of the Naru. There are also more ways and synergies for further CDR, like for example Voice of Harmony, which used to be a much higher up talent in the bottom third of your talents. Now it's practically free very early on in your talents for further CDR to your holy words. What is particularly powerful really is the fact that it might even have more value in Mythic Plus now, Holy Priest, because it's condensed into an actual cooldown. Holy Priest has not been particularly powerful in burst healing type of playstyle, but ever since Archon gave Priest Halo, which has a significant burst healing, and now you can pair this Halo playstyle with Apotheosis and with the buffs that you can get from your holy words, especially the AoE one now in the raid, with Sanctify and the significantly buffed Prayer of Healing for even more AoE, it might now actually be a legitimate burst healing cooldown type of spec, rather than what we already know Holy Priest for, which is this very consistent type of healing, very straightforward type of healing without really too many powerful buttons to press. Now, with the combination of Halo plus the combination of Apotheosis, you can even actually move over straight to Divinity to get the extra healing done inside of Apotheosis. So now you have the 10% healing buff of Divinity. In Archon, you have 10% more healing from Perfected Form, and the more Halo is going to be pulsing healing, the more healing received they will be taking. So it's 10% more healing from here, 10% more healing from here, 10% more healing from Divinity. It does actually fit quite well. You haven't even lost the tools that made you decent in single target or priority healing, which is what you're currently running in this current version of Holy Priest. The Resonant Words and the Light Weaver. You are losing Pontifex, sure, but that wasn't what was making this side of the talent strong. It was more about Resonant Words and about Trail of Light, which is now in the bottom third of the talents, which is rightfully so, because this talent was very powerful for single target healing, and also it is being buffed. It is currently Heal and Flash Heal, duplicating 25% of the healing. Now in the bottom row is going to be Heal, Flash Heal, Power Life, and it's 35% of the duplicated healing, so it's even stronger than before. The final point that is quite positive for Holy Priest, because not much else is being changed. You have the base healing being nerfed, sure, but many other tools have been buffed, like all of Prayer of Healing has been buffed significantly in terms of healing. You have Lightwell being significantly stronger. As mentioned, Resonant Words can now trigger from Prior Life as well. Lightweaver, also as mentioned, can also affect Prayer of Healing, not just heal, and it now has 4 charges instead of 2. Another major buff, Divine Hymn. Now it channels over 5 seconds instead of over 8 seconds. And as we mentioned, multiple other buffs like Trail of Light, duplicated healing being buffed, or Prismatic Echoes affecting Renew. One of the other underrated tools that are actually quite positive for Holy Priest is the choice node of Restitution in the early talents. This is something you've never seen pretty much, because Restitution right now is all the way tucked down here. So not only is in a terrible position because you would have to go through 2 talent points of Desperate Times, which nobody is going for, but more importantly, it's also in the bottom third of the talents where you're already pretty strapped for points, so you don't really have the time, the space to go for Restitution. But now, basically, it's free. It's thrown to you in the very early talents. And the only cost now would be to not have Guardian Spirit reset its cooldown down to 1 minute instead of a 3-minute cooldown if it doesn't proc. The reason why this is very powerful is because this is an Ankh at a 10-minute cooldown. And being a 10-minute cooldown means it will reset in between boss pulls in a raid. So basically, just by taking this talent, you have a free Ankh, a free rest on yourself every time you pull a boss. But this actually can become even more powerful, because you have so many free points to take early on as a Holy Priest. You also get to take, pretty much without any cost, Afterlife. Afterlife increases the duration of Spirit of Redemption by 50% and the range of these spells by 50%. And because your range of your spells are 40 yards, buffed to 46 yards because of Phantom Reach, 50% of that will make your spells 70 yard long in range. Not only that, because you play Archon, you can forego 5% more stamina from your stamina buff and instead take Heightened Alteration to increase the base duration of your Spirit of Redemption by 5 seconds. So now the base duration of your Spirit of Redemption is 20 seconds, buffed by 50% with Afterlife, meaning you have a 30 seconds long Spirit of Redemption when you die. This is very powerful, not only because when you die, of course, thanks to Restitution, you can simply rest yourself, but also because while you are in Spirit of Redemption, as mentioned, you're going to have a 70-yard range, you are not going to be spending any mana, and you will be able to ignore every single mechanic in the fight, because you are intangible, dead, untargetable, and you can just ignore everything and simply focus on healing for 30 seconds, without of course coming at the cost of costing you a combat rest. So it could also become a very good tool for raid progression. Imagine, for example, the last phase of Ansurek. You have the tank exploding in the back, you have the 2 web pools about to spawn, a bunch of damage is coming out. You can just kill yourself with this and then just focus on healing for 30 seconds, ignoring all sorts of mechanics. Holy Priest is also not exactly a very mobile character. Even now with this build, if you were to play more with Prayer of Healing, you would also be more locked into hard casting, meaning healing while on the move would be quite annoying. This could also be fixed by simply being a Spirit of Redemption and not having the need to actually move to heal. So it's also a very good addition to Priest as a whole, because this is actually harmless. You know, if you don't like it, you can just go back to this and play as you were before, with the same talents. So it comes at literally no cost to try this out in the raid and see how useful this could be in an encounter. So when it comes to Holy Priest, there has actually been quite the positive amount of changes coming for 11.1. This is practically the exact opposite when it comes to Discipline. Because when we move from now to Discipline in 11.1, there are a few changes. One is very similar to the Holy Priest change, which is the fact that you lose, not Salvation, but you lose Rapture. And also one of your other cooldowns, in this case not Apotheosis, but Ultimate Penitence, is dragged from the bottom row to the middle row. So in the change, Rapture goes away, it is replaced by Evangelism, which is no longer a choice node with lenience, meaning that now you can take both of them at the same time, and Ultimate Penitence is no longer in the bottom row. Now, this for now is a good positive. It's a good positive because, similar to Holy Priest being strapped for points in the last third, Discipline was in a similar situation. They simply didn't have the room to pick up Ultimate Penitence, especially the 2 follow-up talents to actually get to Overloaded with Light. However, now all of this has been made much easier. It has been made much easier, not in a positive way, but simply because you are forced to, because Train of Thought is now removed from the game. Train of Thought was the one that gave you cooldown reduction to your Power War Shield as well as to your Penance, so it was a very easy take. Now it's no longer here, so it's much more easy to find a talent point to spend in the follow-up of Overloaded with Light. Now the problem is that the other follow-up, which reduced the cooldown of your Ultimate Penitence by upwards of 2 minutes, so turning this major 4-minute cooldown into a much more manageable 2-minute cooldown, is now gone. So now this button will always have a 4-minute cooldown, but at the very least, number one, it's in the middle bracket, so it doesn't cost you a talent point in the last bracket, and now taking the follow-up of this is much easier because Train of Thought is gone. Now the bad part of this is that Train of Thought has been replaced by a terrible talent, in fact an entire terrible line of talents, because Inner Focus gives you 20% more crit chance, but only to your direct healing spells. And then Divine Aegis now gives you a 30% Absorb Shield instead of a 5% Absorb Shield, which seems massive, right? Well, there is a problem. Divine Aegis counted all healing, including Atonement crits. However, the new one does not. The reason why it's so big, the reason why it's a 30% Absorb Shield from your crits, is because it's only counting direct heals. And then lastly, Eternal Barrier is buffing Power Shield by 20%, which is, funnily enough, an even bigger nerf than the previous one, which was a 30%, which was decaying over time. There is a problem though, you have lost your cooldown reduction to your Power Shield, because in the current version of Discipline, at the very least, you have every once in a while, one way to spam Power Shield, thanks to Rapture. And even when you cannot spam it, at least you have Train of Thought to have Renew and Flash Heal reduce the cooldown of your Power Shield. In 11.1, both of these tools are gone. Rapture is gone, train of thought is gone, meaning that your power shield won't have any ways to being reduced in cooldown. So talents like this one, like Indemnity, extending the duration of power shield, which was very good for Rapture because it meant your big ramp before a 20 target atonement healing, burst healing was extended because of Indemnity, because of your early atonement placed were all with power shield thanks to Rapture. Now this is pointless because you no longer have Rapture, and this is also pointless because you no longer have any way to reduce the cooldown of power shield. So now suddenly you have this entire bracket being useless and unusable. You still have Expiation being terrible. Ever since Mind Blast was put on a 20-second cooldown, the value of this talent went down by a lot, and it's still gonna be terrible in this new patch. What is gotten even worse now is Twilight Equilibrium. This talent did find some room to be played by very simply alternating a holy spell with a shadow spell. So you were first turning yourself into shadow form after you cast Mindbender, to turn a bunch of your spells into shadow, so you would be doing Mind Blast into Smite, into Halo, into Smite, into Penance, into Smite, and you would be alternating Holy Shadow to keep gaining this 15% damage buff. What's the problem now? Problem number one of your two ways to proc this consistently was Purge the Wicked, which was doing radiant damage, which was still counting as a holy spell. Now it's gone. Now Purge the Wicked is just Shadow War Pain. It's just shadow damage. It is good for your overall damage because Shadow War Pain also has gotten a flat 25% healing increase as well. Here it is. Shadow War Pain damage is being increased by default, but it's bad for this particular talent, which will no longer count Purge the Wicked, Shadow War Pain as a holy spell. So you're like, well, it's fine, I can still use my Smite to alternate shadow and holy damage. No, because you're playing Void Weaver. And every time you Mind Blast, you activate Void Blast. And guess what Void Blast does? It does shadow damage and replaces Smite. So this talent practically doesn't even have an actual button you can press to weave holy and shadow spells together, unless you want to be using Holy Nova in between your shadow spells. This is also a dead talent. So now you have this entire direct healing spells line being completely dead, and these two talents being completely dead. So now you pretty much have no choice in the talents you're taking down here. You could get the second point of Blaze of Light if you replaced the Overloaded with Light talent, but it's not worth, because you might as well, since you have Ultimate Penitence, you might as well take the follow-up of this ability, also because it's quite good when you get to use it with this major cooldown. There are other poor options all around. We still have some feature that feels quite archaic, like for example Borrowed Time giving you 8% haste for 4 seconds when you cast Power War Shield still feels terrible. It feels now even more terrible now that Power War Shield doesn't have a way to get its cooldown reduced. So you can't even keep this up, because Power War Shield is going to have a 6-second cooldown and this buff lasts for 4 seconds, so it just feels off, just feels bad. It's even bad for a 1 talent point talent, let alone having to spend 2 points for this. This one also feels archaic, as Smite extending the duration of an active atonement by 3 seconds doesn't feel nearly as good. It was barely acceptable back when you had the tier set which allowed you to double cast Smite inside of your Shadow Covenant, so at least this was 6 seconds of an extension of atonement, but now it's only 3 per target, which is not nearly as good. And the same dead talents you had in 11.0 are still dead here. Like the extension of Schism by 6 seconds is not really necessary because you can just do most of your healing in the first 9 seconds anyway, so this is completely useless. The extra absorption after Smite is pretty terrible. The Shield Discipline with Power War Shield now, it's even worse because you get to cast even fewer Power War Shields now, and yet this talent has not been buffed to compensate for the fact that you're casting much fewer Power War Shields. And lastly, the final nerf is the final nerf to Void Summoner. Now, in practice, this is very positive. One of the biggest complaints of Discipline Priest was becoming some kind of Smite cucks, because this one was polarizing your entire rotation in wanting to spam Smite because you wanted to get your Mindbender cooldown low as much as possible. to practically have it active at all times, because the amount of stacking, damage and healing effects that Discipline Priest has inside of your shadow form and your shadow damage spells is massive. You have Shadow Covenant, which buffs you by 20%. You have Twilight Corruption, which buffs you by 10%. You have Abyssal Reverie, which buffs you by another 10%. You then have Entropic Rift being active, which is Mind Blast being used. It's another 20% more healing. Atonement from Void Blast, meaning having Entropic Rift active, is now 100% more effective. So practically all of your power was tied to being in shadow form, to being with Mindbender out or having activated Mind Blast. So it was quite annoying because you wanted to get to this power as much as you could, having to spam Smite so much. So Blizzard found a solution. Well, simple. We are simply going to keep this talent, except we are going to remove Smite. So instead now, you just get the cooldown reduction for your Mindbender with Mind Blast and with Penance. The problem here is that even if the cooldown reduction has been buffed to compensate for the fact that Smite no longer reduces the cooldown, it's still not nearly enough, because the cooldown here used to be 2 seconds per cast. Now it's been buffed to 4 seconds per cast without Smite. This is a net 20-second nerf to the cooldown of Mindbender, because Mind Blast has a 20-second cooldown and Penance has a 9-second cooldown. So even with a 4-second cooldown reduction per cast, you still won't get to cast these nearly as often to get a reasonable cooldown of Mindbender, which will leave you out to dry much more often as a Discipline Priest, because outside of Mindbender you have a far reduced healing power. And again, as mentioned, this came to no compensation. It's not that they flat nerfed the cooldown reduction of your Mindbender, but at least they buffed Shadow Covenant to give you more damage and more healing when you are inside of Mindbender. No, they did nothing of the sort. Now you just have Mindbender up and available less often. So all of these things combined end up being quite poor, because now you have Mindbender active less often, you get to play much less with Power Shield, you lost one of your cooldowns in Rapture, which is being replaced by a cooldown, which is very good, sure, but it has a 4-minute cooldown, which is massive. The reduction in the amount of power shields you can cast have not been adjusted in your talents, so talents that synergize with power shield, like Shield Discipline or like Indemnity, have not been buffed to compensate in any way. Even Ultimate Penitence not being able to get down to a 2-minute cooldown has also not been buffed in any way. You still have completely dead talents in the bottom third, the most important part of your talent tree, with these 2 and these 3 being a complete failure right now. So it does feel like a stark difference from the current situation of Holy Priest. You could even see multiple ways of building Holy Priest, whether or not you want to play around multiple casts of Prayer of Mending with multiple procs of Apotheosis for free. You might be still staying as you are now in the single target focused build with Flash Heal and just heal with your Mastery, maybe take Prismatic Echoes for even more Mastery power. You could be taking tier sets of old, like Lasting Wars, to get more renews out on multiple targets. Even cool and interesting, possibly very powerful situational tools like Restitution, whereas for Discipline it's just mostly depression. Yes, you could wipe your tears away at the very least, knowing the fact that at the moment you are the meta spec in Mythic Plus, but really, you know, that's mostly just a happenstance, casuality. You have a powerful external, it works well with Proc Paladin. The chances that this does the exact same next year are going to be very low, and then when you don't have that, your situation is not nearly as good. Not to mention also that Rapture and Power Shield in general was much more powerful and usable in Mythic Plus than it was in the raid. Especially to save you from one-shots and to save you from massive hits, it was quite useful. Now that is also gone. So overall, that was the purpose of this video, to highlight the planned changes for 11.1 and to show the current disparity right now in the outlook for the Holy Priest version right now, for the planned changes of Holy Priest in 11.1 and the ones for Discipline Priest, which don't seem to be nearly as optimistic, at the very least at the moment. So with this being said, on this Friday, as we are approaching the weekend, according to some at least, we can now leave each other. We're starting as usual the goodbyes by thanking everyone for having watched the video, together with, of course, everyone who has been supporting completely for free by liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. Now, with these things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, It has been a competition, possibly even a duet between me and the dog outside, between who is taking turns speaking into the mic.